The story. 6 years of silence. 6 years after the divorce, he saw her again. She was walking hand in hand with a child. The child? He was Ethan's exact copy. She had kept a secret for 6 years. Now he wants the truth. But she learned to live with the silence. Toledo was vibrant that afternoon, as it rarely was. The sky, a dense blue, seemed to press down on the city's ancient rooftops with an almost solid light. The narrow streets, curved like unresolved memories, echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps from tourists and locals, voices mixed in different languages, laughter, camera clicks, distant bells. And in the middle of that history-saturated scene was him. Ethan Cole walked aimlessly, his shoulders stiff, hands in the pockets of his gray coat, his brow slightly furrowed. His phone vibrated inside his trousers, but he didn't take it out to look. Not today. It was his divorce anniversary. 6 exact years since he signed those papers with black ink and cold hands. It wasn't that he counted, but he knew. His body knew. He'd allowed himself a walk through the old city purely by instinct, or perhaps as a punishment. He had avoided those streets since Clara left, since her name became a kind of ghost murmuring between the windows of the empty house. But something that afternoon drew him back. Maybe it was the smell of autumn, maybe the silence behind the noise, or just the weight of a loneliness that no longer surprised him. He climbed slowly up Angel Street. His eyes scanned wavy glass shop windows, moss-covered stone walls, children running with ice cream dripping down their fingers. He stopped in front of a used book stand, pulled out an old copy of Neruda, and flipped through it without reading. The paper smelled of time. The poetry, if it still lived there, no longer touched him. It was then that everything stopped. Not time, but something inside him. An invisible force turned his face to the side, as if a silent hand pushed his chin. And he saw. There, a few meters away, walking in the opposite direction, was her. Clara. The name formed in his mind with the weight of a contained blow. She hadn't seen him yet. She walked distractedly, holding the hand of a boy who must have been 5, maybe 6. The child looked around with a serene curiosity, his face slightly furrowed, his body leaning to one side as if trying to absorb the world. Ethan felt his knees give way by an inch. The child was his portrait, not a vague or generic resemblance. It was him. Those intense brown eyes, too large for his face. That slightly arched brow, like someone carrying questions he doesn't yet know how to ask. The firm chin. The way he walked, hands loose, a sure step, the slight forward tilt of his neck, as if he was always listening to what wasn't being said. Clara looked to the side and saw him. There was no fear, no scream, no running. She simply stopped for a second. Her eyes clung to his with a mute, undecipherable force. It wasn't anger, nor fear. It was something more solid, a wall of silence between two worlds that once loved each other, and who now looked at each other as strangers. Ethan took a step. His heart was beating so hard, he felt his temples throb. He opened his mouth. The word was about to come out. But the air seemed to fail. "Clara?" He tried, but the voice didn't reach his lips. She squeezed the child's hand more firmly. She looked away and started walking. Not fast, not in a hurry, but with an irreversible decision, like someone closing a door without a sound. Ethan wanted to run. He wanted to scream. He wanted to call the child's name without even knowing what it was. But his legs didn't obey. They were nailed to the ground like the roots of a rotten tree. Everything inside him was shouting, but his body refused to react. The crowd grew. Tourists with colorful hats, students with backpacks, a couple laughing loudly, a dog barking, and in seconds, she was gone. Disappeared like smoke in the middle of the street. He searched with his eyes everywhere, turned his body, searched desperately, but there was no sign. Neither of the woman, nor the child. Nothing. Only the echo of a life he didn't know existed. He leaned against a stone wall, trying to breathe. His chest hurt, not like a heart attack, but as if someone had opened his ribs with bare hands and ripped something out from inside. He was sweating cold. His hands were trembling. He tried to rationalize. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe the child just resembled him. Children look alike. It wasn't certainty, but then he remembered the eyes. Those brown eyes, identical to his own when he was the same age. And there was no way to pretend. Ethan Cole, a recognized architect, son of one of the most influential families in Castilla-La Mancha, was stopped in the middle of the street like an ordinary man, before an old wound that never healed, and which was now bleeding again, deeper, dirtier, more real, dirtier. More, a man who had everything, then lost everything, and now discovered that maybe he had never known anything. The city continued around him as if nothing had happened, because to the world, truly, nothing happened. Just another man standing in front of a book stand, just another pale face in the crowd, just another story no one saw happen. But for him, right there, in that instant, reality had cracked. And through that crack, he saw something he couldn't unsee. Before the crack, the betrayal. 6 years earlier, before the crack, before the silence, before Mateo, there was a woman trying to hold together what was already collapsing. Clara woke up early. She made coffee, set the table with 2 cups even when he left without touching either. She tried. It was the verb she conjugated alone the most in those days. To triu. She tried to smile, tried to converse, tried to get Ethan to look at her the same way he looked at his glass and concrete projects, with fascination and attention. But his eyes had become foreign maps. There was no longer a path, only walls. Ethan arrived late, always smelling of cigarette smoke and boredom. He said he was overloaded with the new bid, with the firm, with his father's pressure. But Clara knew he was overloading himself with his own coldness. She felt, like someone noticing a leak in the roof, that something in her house was crumbling from within. That morning, fine rain tapped against the glass windows of the house in the ensanche. Clara looked at her reflection in the mirror. Sunken eyes, dry mouth, a trace of forgotten makeup under her chin. She decided not to cry. She showered, pulled her hair into a hurried bun, grabbed a coat, and went out. She carried a bag with freshly baked empanadas and an envelope. Inside, a small symbolic gift, a sketch of the project they designed together in their first month of marriage on tracing paper. They never built it, but Clara kept it. It was more than a draft. It was memory. It was roots. I'm going to the firm. I'm going to surprise him. She said it out loud, to no one. Perhaps to convince herself. She took the metro, got off at Plaza Zocodover, and walked to the commercial building where the Cole and Associates architecture firm was located. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, each one slower than the last. Her heart wasn't beating fast. It was shrinking. Each step seemed like a question. The hallway was silent. The main door was ajar. She could have knocked, but she pushed the door with her fingers and entered slowly. His voice was the first thing, low, muffled, laughing. "If we keep this up, we'll end up designing the wrong bed," he said, through stifled laughter. Then, the image. She saw. She saw Ethan sitting at the project table, among papers and rulers, his shirt half open, the secretary's fingers between the buttons. She saw the 2 of them close, laughing, their eyes closed. She saw her hand sliding down his neck as if she already knew the way. She saw the body that was once hers belonging to another presence. And something in her broke, but silently. Clara did not scream. She did not run. She did not slam the door. She did not throw the envelope to the floor. She simply stepped back, as if the scene in front of her was a slow-motion fire, as if looking too much meant letting the smell of betrayal soak into her skin. She descended the 3 flights of stairs with chilling dignity, the bag of empanadas still in her hand. The envelope remained. She left the building like someone leaving a burning house, but on the outside, she was intact. Inside, there was no longer a roof, no floor. She hailed a taxi and didn't look back. That night, Ethan came home as always, late, exhausted, without looking at her. He found a cold dinner on the table and a letter on the plate. 3 lines. I don't want explanations. I want distance. I want a divorce. She wasn't in the bedroom, nor the bathroom, nor the house. Ethan perhaps didn't understand at first. Maybe he thought it was a bluff, a crisis, a whim. But she didn't return. The next day, Clara's lawyer called. 2 days later, the separation process was already filed. And, for the first time in years, Ethan perceived the silence. Not the silence of someone's absence, but the silence of someone who never comes back. The secret. Mateo. The news arrived without warning, on a mild late spring day. A late period, a strange body, sharp intuition. She bought a pharmacy test and waited alone in the bathroom of the house she had shared with Ethan. The 2 lines appeared with cruel speed, without hesitation. There was the answer. She wasn't alone. She never would be again. She sat on the cold tile floor, the test between her fingers, her legs folded, her heart trying to organize its own beats. She should have cried. She didn't. She touched her still flat belly with the palm of her hand and whispered, without knowing why. Did you come? The news could have been light, but an old shadow covered everything. The memory flashed in her mind, clear, direct, threatening. If you get pregnant and we separate, I will take that child from you. The Coles have power. Never forget that. He had said that one night during an argument, long before the betrayal, when fighting already replaced intimacy, when she dared to say she dreamed of children. And he, with the coldness of someone who knows the weight of the family name, cut the dream in half with that dry, unwavering phrase. At the time, Clara laughed. She thought it was an exaggeration. But now, with those 2 lines on the test, the phrase resonated with a different gravity. It was a threat. And more, it was the memory of the man he truly was. She spent the following days in silence. She left the house only for appointments, always at alternative times. She avoided friends, neighbors, even family. Her small belly could still be hidden. But the fear grew. She knew what the Coles were capable of. She knew about Ethan's father's power. His contacts with judges, his political influence, the way they silenced scandals and manipulated judicial decisions. She had already heard stories. She had already seen it happen with his cousin, who lost custody of her son for being emotionally unstable. Instability, in that case, meant trying to get out of a sick marriage. Then she understood. She couldn't stay. The decision came in a sleepless early morning. Sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands pressing the pillow against her chest, she took stock. She had little money saved, a gold bracelet her grandmother had left her, some clothes, and the instinct to protect that small heart beating inside her. She called her mother in Granada. She didn't explain much, just said, "I need to go." "Today? Just the 2 of us. Can it be?" On the other end of the line, there was silence. Then, a brief answer. She packed in an hour. Few clothes, documents, the pregnancy test tucked between the pages of a poetry book. She left the house before the sun rose. She called a taxi. She didn't look back. The apartment, once a home, was now an empty shell. Every corner still had his scent, and she could no longer stand that expensive perfume that hid so much venom. She arrived at the terminal with a racing pulse. She bought a one-way ticket. Getting on the bus, she sat near the window, wrapped in her coat, as if it were makeshift armor. She looked out as the vehicle pulled away. The streets of Toledo gradually faded, each streetlight, a memory left behind. She arrived in Granada shortly after noon. Her mother was at the door. She hugged her without asking questions, without demanding explanations. She just hugged her, tightly, silently, present. Clara cried, finally. A muffled cry, without scandalous tears. It was more a release than a desperation. In the first days, she didn't leave the room. She slept a lot. Or little. She spent hours with her hand over her belly, trying to imagine a future she couldn't quite see. Her mother cooked for two. She spoke little. It was as if she knew that silence could also be a hug. When she finally spoke, it was a Sunday. "Do you want to tell him?" Clara took a long time to answer. Then she shook her head. "No, I don't want to. I can't. But he is the father. He is the danger." Her mother didn't insist. The rebuilding, Clara Aranda. Weeks turned into months. Her belly grew. Along with it, her strength. Clara found a small technical drawing course offered by a local NGO. She started attending. Then, she got an internship at a modest architectural firm with a kind, widowed architect who taught her more than any university. There, she wasn't the ex-wife of the coal heir. She was just Clara, talented, thirsty to start anew. The pregnancy was difficult. Nausea, low blood pressure, insomnia. But she resisted. Every beat of the baby's heart was a reminder that she was alive. That choosing to run was choosing to live. Matteo was born one hot September afternoon. The labor was long, and when she finally held him, everything around her silenced. There was no pain, no fear, only him. His eyes opened, brown, immense, and looked at her as if they already knew her. Clara smiled. "You really came." That night, she wrote a single sentence in her diary. From now on, everything is for him, and she kept her word. From the day she first held Matteo in her arms, Clara never wavered again. Not because there was no fear, it existed, throbbing in sleepless nights and uncertain afternoons. But she learned to use fear as fuel. Every step, every achievement, was taken with the steady hands of someone carrying her own world on her lap. Matteo grew up surrounded by affection. There were no luxuries, but there was firm ground. There was no powerful surname, but there was a clean, honest name. Clara learned to make rice with lentils in silence, to deal with night fevers without panicking, to tell stories of enchanted worlds, while her own eyes were red from fatigue. At first, she lived with her mother in a small apartment, on the second floor of an old building in the Realejo neighborhood. The room she shared with her son had peeling walls, but the windows overlooked a sky that seemed to understand her unspoken prayers. When Matteo turned 2, she got him a spot in the municipal nursery. Clara began working full-time at the same firm where she had interned, now as a project assistant. 3 years later, she received a partial scholarship to an architecture faculty. At night, she sat in the tiny living room and sketched freehand while Matteo slept. The lines she drew were no longer just facades or structures. They were maps of her survival. She had learned to transform absence into foundation, pain into concrete. Everything that once broke her was now part of what sustained her. She excelled. The professors saw something unusual in her, a rare blend of technical precision and contained emotion. She designed houses that seemed to understand people's emptiness. She chased after every lost class, did assignments while washing dishes, studied during pediatrician appointments, read by the edge of the bed while Matteo asked for just one more minute before sleeping. She earned a full scholarship in the 3rd semester. Then, her first paid internship. And with that, she rented a small apartment just for them, 2 rooms, a narrow hallway, a balcony where she planted basil and lavender. She never told anyone about Ethan. Her college classmates imagined she was widowed. Some thought she was a single mother by choice. Clara didn't correct them. She didn't lie. But she didn't give anything away either. She guarded that part of her history like someone keeping broken glass, careful not to cut her fingers. For Matteo's birthdays, she made simple cakes and filled the apartment with recycled balloons. In the photos, only the 2 of them, mother and son. A silent portrait of everything she had built, without fanfare, without help, without surnames. Sometimes, she dreamed of him, not of Ethan, but of the child Matteo could have been if he had grown up with his father's presence. In some dreams, he ran in a huge garden holding 2 hands. In others, he said, "Mom, why didn't he come?" And Clara woke up sweating, swallowing a guilt she wasn't sure was justified. But she never hesitated. She never let the decision to have fled slip into regret. She knew what she had done. She knew why she had done it. And she knew that by doing so, she not only saved herself but also saved her son from growing up in the shadow of a name that never meant protection. At the age of 5, Matteo asked for the first time, "Mom, why don't I have a dad?" Clara knelt down, held his face in her hands, and replied, "Because you have me, and I never left you." Matteo didn't answer. He just leaned his head on her shoulder. And in that embrace, Clara understood that love was also a language spoken with presence. In her final year of college, she presented her thesis, a social housing project focused on single mothers. The jury was silent for a few seconds after the presentation. Then, they applauded. Her tutor hugged her with moist eyes. She left the room with the feeling of having rebuilt everything that had once been demolished. She got a job at an architecture firm focused on social projects. It wasn't Ethan's award-winning firm, but it was a space where her voice had weight. She bought a used bicycle, took Matteo to school pedaling. On Saturdays, they frequented the same corner ice cream parlor. She always ordered vanilla. He, mint chocolate chip. It was the only fixed habit of the week, the ritual of remembering that life also needed sweetness. And so, with small, dignified steps, Clara got there. A firm woman, mother of a child who smiled with his whole body, an admired professional, owner of her own story. She won, and she didn't need anyone to see it for it to be true. But now someone saw Ethan, the confrontation, stepping onto her ground. The image of the child wouldn't leave his head, so sharp it hurt. The features, the gait, the attentive silence that he himself had at 5 years old. The eyes, God, the eyes. As if time had folded over itself and returned to Ethan, the mirror of a past he never lived, but which now looked at him through the streets of Toledo with implacable naturalness. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't projection. It was the truth. In the days that followed the fleeting reunion, Ethan tried to convince himself that he didn't need to know more. He tried because he knew what would come next. Guilt, fear, shame. But he failed. In his office, he drew lines on boards that led nowhere. At night, he read reports he didn't retain. He started sentences and left them halfway. When someone asked if he was okay, he automatically replied with a clear, but inside, everything was noise. He hired someone discreet to investigate. He asked them to track Clara, but without invading, without causing a scandal. 2 days later, he received an envelope in hand. Granada, Realejo neighborhood, her mother's name as the apartment's leaseholder, the child's school, a first semester report card, enrollment photo. Name, Mateo Aranda. He didn't carry his last name. But the face was enough. Ethan stood there, documents on the table, as if observing the record of a life he never participated in. And with that, the inevitable question, what would he do with it? He called his driver. He asked him to prepare the car for a trip. He needed time to think, he said. But what he wanted, deep down, was time to undo. The trip to Granada was long, though short in kilometers. The car seemed smaller, the air denser. He didn't speak during the 4-hour drive. He just watched the landscape change with an immobile face. He thought about Clara, about the courage she had to disappear, about the courage he never had to be someone different. He arrived at the address, a discreet street, low buildings, children playing on the sidewalk. He got out slowly, his hands damp. He climbed the steps with silent footsteps. The doorbell was simple, round. He rang it once, and waited. When the door opened, the image in front of him disarmed him. Clara, her hair shorter, her face more mature, but the eyes the same, intense, clear, strong. She didn't seem surprised. She looked at him like someone who was already expecting him, like someone who already knew that someday this moment would come. "Ethan," she said. Without emotion, he didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her as if he still couldn't believe she was there. Real, alive, out of reach? "He's my son, isn't he?" The question came out like a stone. There was no accusatory tone, only truth, and an old fear mixed with a new one. Clara didn't look away. She didn't move. She just took a deep breath, firm. "Yes, Mateo is your son, but he is my world." The words fell between them like a verdict. For an instant, neither of them spoke. The silence grew louder. The sound of the street in the background, a dog barking, a ball bouncing on the asphalt, everything seemed distant, as if they were isolated inside a thick glass. Ethan tried to organize a thought, but his body spoke first, his hands trembling, his throat dry, the weight on his chest. He didn't know if he could enter. He didn't know if he should. "Why didn't you tell me?" She gave a bitter smile. Her eyes remained fixed on his, but there was a weariness there that didn't exist before. "Do you remember what you told me, a year before everything ended? If you get pregnant and we separate, I will take that child from you. The Coles have power. Never forget that." Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered. The phrase was real. He said it in anger, on any given night, and he never thought she would take it seriously. "Clara, you don't need to explain yourself," she interrupted him, with a gentle but firm gesture. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because he needs me whole, and I could only be whole far away from you." The words were like clean blades. There were no shouts, no tears, but every syllable carried the pain of years. "Can I see him?" She hesitated for the first time. Her eyes flickered, her body moved slightly. "He's at the park with my mother. He'll be back in half an hour. You can see him, but don't confuse things." "What things?" She looked at him deeply and replied, "You can be a father, but I am everything he knows, and I won't allow that to change." Ethan nodded, his gaze lowered. There was no room for dispute there. Only one possible path, entering the other's territory with respect. And he, finally, was ready to tread carefully. And in that moment, Standing in the doorway that had been closed to him for so long, Ethan felt what he had never truly felt. Guilt. Not the theatrical, performative guilt, but the guilt that hurts because it recognizes, that burns because it is true. That is silent because it knows it has been wrong. Clara stepped aside, making space for him to enter. And so, without rituals, without hugs, without promises, the story began to reopen. Final reflection, Ethan entered Clara's apartment with the same feeling of invading a sanctuary. It was a small, modest space, but clean, alive. The furniture didn't match, but every object seemed to have been placed there with an intimate purpose. There were children's drawings taped to the fridge, a plant on the windowsill, a crooked lamp next to a worn armchair, and in the center of it all, the subtle scent of lavender, the same one she used on her pillow when they still slept together, although now it seemed like a different perfume, more mature, more hers. Ethan saw what Clara meant. The future wasn't about redemption. It was about responsibility. And next to that woman he once loved, he finally understood that she was not just the mother of his son. She was unbreakable, and that he could never attain. He understood it. Not in the arrogant way of someone who finally understands a woman, but like someone who, after a long time, recognizes the exact void he left behind. And the hardest thing to accept was that Clara was no longer in that void. She filled it alone. With silence, with struggle, with her own hands. With the precise architecture of someone who learned to build from the rubble. He saw it now. In every one of her gestures, in the way she organized Mateo's life with a firm and affectionate routine, in the way she spoke to his schoolmates' parents with a confident voice, unafraid of judgment, in the way she wore simple clothes that seemed tailor-made, as if her body had learned to fit exactly where it wanted to. Clara flourished, and he was just a spectator. Ethan began to accompany Mateo more often. He took his son to the park on alternate Saturdays. Clara's mother supervised him with an eagle's eye, never hostile, but always attentive. Clara trusted her instinct. It was like an invisible net of protection. The child would never be completely alone with Ethan. There would always be a watchful eye nearby, and Ethan never complained about it. He accepted it, because he knew he had no right to ask for more than that. One morning, after dropping Mateo off at school, Ethan saw Clara across the street. She was wearing a blue skirt, low heels, a folder under her arm, and a cup of coffee in her hand. She was talking on the phone, concentrated, walking quickly. She was so clear, so solid in that instant, that Ethan stopped to observe. He saw a woman he didn't know. A woman that time had sculpted with precision. She crossed the street, hung up the phone, and saw him. She stopped in front of him. Her eyes weren't cold. They were serene, like someone who no longer expects anything. And precisely because of that, she doesn't need to protect herself. "Do you need something?" she asked simply. "No," he replied, hesitant. I was going to say you look different. I'm alive. That's it. And you are learning to look." She walked past him without waiting for an answer, and that echoed in him as a reminder. There are pains that don't heal. They transform. And Clara transformed. Later that same day, Ethan opened his laptop and searched her name. He found an article. Clara Aranda, architect and urban planner, winner of a regional award for a sustainable social housing project. The text spoke of her with reverence. It mentioned her education, her trajectory, her focus on vulnerable communities. No influential surnames, no inheritances. Everything was merit. Every paragraph was a confirmation of what he was already beginning to accept. Clara not only survived, she became someone else. And he remained rich. He continued signing projects, accumulating awards, attending gala dinners. But everything he carried in his pockets, the contacts, the promises, the contracts, now seemed lighter than a dry leaf compared to the concrete weight of the presents Clara earned with her own story. The power of the Coles? Impotent there. Because Clara was no longer accessible through influence. She could not be bent by surnames. She was not for sale. Ethan understood it, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. And looking at Mateo, seeing him grow up with the tenderness of someone who was loved unconditionally, he understood that everything Clara built, the balance, the clarity, the unconditional love, cannot be bought. It is not inherited. It is only earned. And he arrived too late. Now tell me, if you were in Clara's place, would you have done the same thing? Would you have left without telling him about the pregnancy? Comment below. I really want to know what you would do. And if this story touched you in any way, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. See you in the next story.